John Burris. I'd like to thank you for watching this short video. This video is called The Layers and Tubes of the Body. In this video, I'll explain a whole new way to see our anatomy, take you out of 19th, 18th century anatomy into modern anatomy. I'll be exploring a new perspective on our whole human experience. So in this video, I'll be using the Fascia network as a model or roadmap to show you how our body is essentially a bunch of tubes and layers. And those tubes or layers are really important because in many cases, as we get older and through injuries and whatnot, those tubes and layers will glue together and the fascia fuses together and it becomes problematic. And what's also important, and I'll be sharing with you later on, is most of us don't ever correct that, or we use improper healing modalities that never address the layers of the body. So if you think about the human body, it's much like an onion or a tree where there's layers and layers and rings and layers and rings. And it starts in our early development and we build a layer on top of another layer, and those layers are fascia tissue. And if you haven't watched my original series on fascia, it might give you a refresher of the fascia in the body. The fascia is a network of connective tissue that travels all through the body, and it's what holds us together. And it's assorted into layers and tubes. And those layers and tubes are really important because as we get older, as I said before, most people's layers and tubes will fuse together. And they don't know what's happening, and they don't know how to get out of that place. So in this video, I'll share with you this new way of seeing anatomy and the ways to correct those layers and tubes that get fused together. So let's go ahead and begin. Here's a picture of a tree and its many rings. The irony is our human body is not much different than this tree. As the tree develops, it develops from the inside out. So the oldest part of the tree is on the inside, what's called the core of the tree. The outside is the newest part. And just like a tree, the tree has its outer bark, that's a protective layer. We have outer barks on our body too. It's called our skin and other hard tissues that protect us from the inside out. So as the tree develops, it puts another ring on every year, and you can determine what happened in that year based on how you analyze that ring. Our human body puts on layers and layers and layers too from our earliest development, and we end up with it as a series of layers. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily taught in normal anatomy. To give credit where credit is due, most of these ideas stem from my study of emotional anatomy by Stanley Kellerman. He's the first one who introduced me to the tubes and layers theory. So a lot of these concepts that I'm presenting for you today came from the work of Stanley Kellerman. So he's the one who started this thought process for me, and I just added my own parts to it. So if you'd like to check out his work, it's called Emotional Anatomy is the name of the book, and a lot of these ideas I'll be sharing with you today. As we first develop in the womb, we develop from our center, or what's called our core, our reptilian brain. So the brain and spinal cord are essentially the higher thinking brains called the cortex. The emotional brain, the mammalian brain is underneath that, and the reptilian brain is what's underneath that. It travels down our spine. Also, there's all kinds of spiritual energy centers that many talk about along the spine and center of the body. So the center of our body is the beginning, or our central core, where all life begins. And that's how we build layers around that. And here's my adaptation of a picture from Stanley Kellerman. So the original work came from Stanley Kellerman. I just drew my own version. How what's called the embryonic tube is the center of our body. It's our core. That's where the life force, all the kundalini energy, all the important information starts from. And we start to build layers around that. So in a young person here, we're building layers and layers and layers around our body. And those layers go, in your torso and your arms and legs. But they're centered around the reptilian brain, the fight or flight experience. The whole core of our brain essentially travels down to the body and creates layers and layers of fascia tissue that are all creating these tubes we talk about. And here's a picture, once again, based on Stanley Kellerman's work, my adaptation of his work. When we get older, the tubes don't go away. We're still a bunch of layers and tubes in our body, all made out of fascia and other connective tissues. So those layers don't go away. We continue, and in most people's cases, they keep putting on a layer after layer after layer. It's called protection or emotional protection. Or when you do a lot of weight training, you're actually putting on layers around your body. So as an adult, we're still layers and tubes. And this is an actual picture from Stanley Kellerman's book, Emotional Anatomy. It shows you an adult body and all the layers and tubes that are like balloons inside of each other, all made of fascia tissue that are basically creating the body that we have. So layers and tubes, and once again, this is a picture from Stanley Kellerman's book, Emotional Anatomy. So an important question to ask is, why is John Burroughs talking about layers and tubes of fascia in the body? Well, it's incredibly important for our own healing and aging process to understand the layers and tubes of the body. For instance, if you just go to the gym and lift weights, you're going to be putting on more layers of hard, dried out fascia tissue that it becomes another layer of like a bark around a tree. And if you have an injury, for example, and all you do is strength train to try to correct the injury, you're not really correcting the injury. You're putting more layers of fascia around the injury, and the injury never really gets corrected. It just becomes walled off by the hardened, dried out fascia tissue. There are many people, many smart people who've said we were born as a grape and most people die as a raisin. Well, that's because our layers dry out because of what we're doing through the course of our lifetime. Most of us are doing mostly the wrong things because we've been giving a wrong model on anatomy. I teach what's called new anatomy, based on new ideas. Most people are following anatomy that's perhaps hundreds of years old, that doesn't really comprehend a lot of these magnificent parts of our own body. So the tubes and layers of the body are really important. Just like a tree, those tubes will keep expanding, and in many cases, the layers will glue together, and then you're going to be stiff, hard, tight, dried out, because you're not acknowledging your tubes and layers of fascia running through your body. Remember, the fascia is a basically liquid medium, and it's basically travels everywhere in your body, and when the liquid dries out, it bonds together with other tissues, and it becomes hard, dried, it becomes rubbery and almost like a bone. And it's like watching a tree dry out and die. Well, that's what happens in our own body. Our layers of tubes of fascia and connective tissues dry out and fuse together in most people's cases. If we go back to our original tree analogy, we can use that to study the human body. Here's a picture of a very old tree that many years or decades before was hit by a car. And yes, the tree survived, but a lot of the bark was scraped away, and you can expose deeper layers of the tree. Well, what's also happened is the tree bark and deeper layers of the tree have kind of coalesced around the injury and walled it off to protect it. And those layers became narrower and more dried out, almost like creating a scar, which you'll see in the human body. So the layers of the tree became narrower, more dried out, and protective of the original wound. That's exactly what our own bodies do. Here's a picture of a tree that many years ago was struck by an avalanche. So you can see where the bark was stripped away, and the layers around the injury became narrower, more dried out, and more protective. So they all squeezed together to form a scar. And this is exactly what happens in our own human body when you have an injury. Your fascia dries out, fuses together, gets narrower, and it kind of coalesces around the injury. We do the exact same thing. So here's a picture of a tree and its many rings and showing the history of the tree. You have scars from a forest fire halfway in, a dry season, a rainy season, the first year of growth. Our bodies are exactly the same thing. As a fascia body worker, when I touch somebody and I find a disturbance, I can usually give an age to it by how hard, dried out it is. Somebody might say, well, it's only been hurting me for 6 months, but I can tell them, you know, it's been 10, 20, 30 years since this has been here because it's that hard, that dried out, that profound. The layers are multiply fused together. This is not a new issue. You might be feeling it for the first time, but this has been around a long time because our bodies have the same layering system. A trauma can get stored many layers deep and you don't even know about it. Here we have a story of a tree that was hit by a flood many years ago. And the flood went several layers deep, partly because the bark of the tree was exposed in this section. So the floodwaters carried many layers deep. Well, if we have a significant trauma to our body, a fall, a ski crash, a bicycle crash, a car crash, that trauma may go many layers deep. It might not just be on the outside. It may be carrying through many layers of your body, just like this tree had a flood go all the way through it. Now let's get back to the human body. We talked about how the rings of the tree will contract, expand, they will glue together, fuse together. Well, the same thing happens with our fascia bands, our tubes in our body. Most people as their age, their fascia tubes will glue together and dry out because they're not taught how to correct them. Most current exercise programs cause the fascia tubes to dry out and glue together. Many of the body work and healing techniques cause the tubes to dry out and glue together. Here's an interesting example here. Here is a human head, and when I turn it on its side and look at a crosscut here, all the layers and tubes going into the head and neck here, we have nerves and blood vessels and many muscles. They're all tubes and layers. And when they harden and glue together, they create perhaps circulatory issues, vascular issues, maybe even cognitive issues, headaches, whatnot, because all the tubes in your neck are just squeezing too tight and you're not getting the blood flow you need. So that's just one example of our tubular system going awry and how it can cause all kinds of health problems as your layers of fascia fuse together and glue together. The current exercise models are horrible for tubes and fascia. They tend to put layers on top, almost like you keep building the bark around your tree. We call it in the healing world the emotional armor of the body. You're deadening your body by putting on more layers and more layers of hard muscle tissue, and you're deadening the tubes inside. The current practice of core work and Pilates and tightening your core is killing the tubes and layers in the body, which are energy and information. And that practice is destroying your tubes and layers of fascia. But that's the current model we're in. So here's an analogy I like to work with. Your body's not much different than a paper towel. And all these layers, they're all fused together here. So you think about layers and layers of tissue and how basically we have all these layers. And what happens is you might have an injury that goes several layers deep. And it might be a bicycle accident, a motorcycle accident, a skiing accident. It could be, but the trauma goes through multiple layers of the body. Almost like if you had a stack of newspapers sitting in your garage for years and you tried to peel them apart, you couldn't because they're all glued together. They're separate layers that became fused together. Unfortunately, the current model of healing doesn't do much to respect that. They'll take your elbow and do deep tissue work, but they don't get the layers out. It bounces back the next day. It's one of the most, I would say, the least effective techniques they can do because it doesn't respect the layering process of the body. Where in my work, fascia body work, what I've created is a layering system. I peel away layer by layer by layer with my fingertips and start to unravel the mystery of that wound because I can feel it with my fingers how deep it goes and how many layers it's involved. In another case, the outside of your layering system might be fine. You go, I don't feel anything. But deep inside, you've got this pocket of injury that happened decades ago, perhaps. Well, that's not going to come out right away. You've got to peel away the layers and layers and layers to get that out because we're all a bunch of tubes and layers, and many of our injuries are stored deep inside. You can't just pound the body away and dig it out. You've got to peel away the layers. So what I do, I'll peel it away with my fingers, or I'll teach yoga students how to unravel their body. In the fitness world, what they do is they put a layer around it, like another bark, per se. And they go, okay, let's just protect that layer here. When you go into most physical therapy offices, the first thing they do is they do strength training because they want to put a layer around your injury. They don't really want to correct it or get it out. They want to put another layer of protection around it. That's the model they're currently using, and I totally disagree. So what I work with in healing is I help people unravel these layers that somehow got fused together and they have injuries stuck in many different places, and you have to dig them out. Well, it's not a quick fix. If you want a quick fix, that's the magic pill scenario. I don't do that. That doesn't usually work. It often takes weeks, months, or years to cure some of these issues here, particularly if you have a frozen shoulder. Frozen shoulder is very complicated because you have all the tissue that's glued together. All those layers and tubes are fused together. Now, in the medical surgical world, they either operate or a lot of times they just rip it and try to rip the layers apart. In the physical therapy world, they try to build strength around it, like they just showed you, by putting layers and layers of more protection around it. Well, that doesn't really heal it either. So in my world, what I try to do is strip away the layers and layers and layers. It takes time and patience because that's not an easy fix. It's fixable, but you have to unglue layers of fused together fascia that have been fused together for a long time, and that takes time and patience. Here's a picture of an old book that all the pages are fused together over decades or hundreds of years, being pressed together and dried out. Well, that's a lot of what happens to our human body. Our many layers become dried out and fused together because of what we're doing. That doesn't have to happen, but most of us do the wrong things, and this is what we end up with. So that's how the body, in most people, ages. Their injuries get glued together and fused together. And unfortunately, most of the healing techniques in our culture don't correct the layer and tube system. They add more to it. For example, one of my most offensive things people do is the foam rollers. And they think they're correcting their body. They're abusing their body. It's a gimmick. It does very little. For example, if this were the fascia in your body, I took a piece of saran wrap, and this is the fascia in your body, especially along your side, your IT band, and I put it down, and I took a roller, in this case a bakery roller, and I rolled it over that. Am I changing the saran wrap? No, I'm not. I'm just pushing it into this block. So when you're using a foam roller, you're pushing the fascia down, the layers of fascia down, into the bone, but you're not correcting them. You're not separating them. You're not creating a healthier, more liquid fascia system. You're pushing it into the bone, and the next day it pops back up because you don't understand how fascia and layers really work. So I don't recommend foam rollers. Many of the physical therapy techniques I don't recommend either. If you walk into a physical therapist's office, the first thing you see gym equipment. Run. Because all they're trying to do is build muscle around your injuries, which is Like the tree, building another layer of bark around the injury. You're not getting to the injury site. In order to correctly heal, you've got to peel away the layers and peel away the layers. For me, what I do in my private practice, I use my hands to peel away the layers. I help students with movement therapy and yoga therapy to peel away the layers. And once again, to peel away the layers that have been there for decades, it may take weeks, months, or years to get them released because they're glued together. Their anatomy actually changed from healthy tissue to hard, rubbery, bony tissue. So that takes time to do that. So what should we be doing? Here's an animated picture of a yoga pose. If fascia is all water and all the fascia is layered in tubes and layering, then our body is essentially a bag of water. So this is what an ideal yoga pose looks like, a bag of water moving through time and space. Here's an example of a person in a yoga back bend. And every tube is being moved and stretched and elongated. So the whole person is moving one tube at a time. They're all being layered and stretched, not just the outer bark, but the entire body tubes are stretching. I highly encourage anybody who wants to heal and get through injuries and old aging stiff problems to practice regular yoga, perhaps 3 to 4 times a week, because you start to liquefy, energize, and unglue those layers and tubes in your body. And especially if you have old injuries that have been buried within your fascia tree, those layers aren't going away. That hard tissue is glued together. And the yoga experience will start to unravel some of that. Now, it might take time and practice and focus. Massages are good. Swedish massage is mostly for muscle tissue, but that would be helpful as well. Fascia body work is really important. When I work with clients, I'll give them assessment. When I first touch their body, I'll go, okay, in my mind, you're an 8 out of 10, which means you're crusty and old. You're like an old weathered tree because you're dried out and you're fused together. And as I progress over time, weeks or months down the road, I'll give them another assessment. Oh, you're a 4 now because your layers are moving now. Your tubes are moving. Your fascia has energy and liquid nature again. And we peeled away a lot of those injuries that are stuck within the tissue. That hardened ankle that feels like concrete is coming alive again. That shoulder that was frozen is coming alive again. But it takes work and repetitive work, and it takes patience to get there. So fascia body work, movement therapy, a regular massage would help, a regular yoga practice, all those help to unravel the glued together tubes and layers of the human body caused by the fascia drying out and gluing together. In essence, healing isn't about putting more layers on a protection, whether you weight training or physical therapy model. It's about peeling away the layers, stripping away the layers of hard fascia that are glued together and protecting old wounds. In order to heal, you've got to focus on peeling away your many layers and tubes. I hope that this information is beneficial for you. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about me, please subscribe to my channel for more leading edge videos to come. You can also visit my website at johnburris.com for more leading edge information and articles. Thank you.